Hello and welcome to Gamers Getting Older,
where a group of older gamers get together,
talk about the good old days of gaming,
and how times have changed for the better or worse. I'm Brendan.
I'm Steven.
I'm Nick, and we are
Gamers
Getting Older.
Wow, that was
perfect, guys. Perfect.
And that was good, but not great. Hello and welcome back to another week of Gamers Getting Older. This week we're going back to the PlayStation, the PS, the PS1, codename PSX. I didn't have one growing up. I played a few games on it. These two played it a lot more. What do you guys think of the PlayStation 1?
For me, I think it revolutionized the way that I played games personally. Like, I played a lot of games and other systems up to this point. And I remember the Sega Genesis kind of like shaping how I felt about games with Sonic and like Sonic Pinball and some other games. But when I started playing games on the PlayStation, I was obviously a little bit older and able to understand the depth of the stories of like RPGs. And I feel like the PlayStation just pumped out so many good RPGs and just so many games of that nature that I'd have to say it's probably one of my favorite systems with just the games that were developed on it.
Oh, just a plethora of amazing games. It was an RPG machine. I mean, all of the Final Fantasies, Legend of Lagoon, more Chrono Cross. What's that one that you like a lot? Valiant Hearts,
Vandal Hearts, and then
Vandal
there's
Hearts.
Suikoden was the other one.
Suikoden, Grandia. I mean, there's so many RPGs that it's just an RPG monster, but it's also a monster for many other reasons too. Medal of Honor was great.
Twisted Metal.
That's a very great one. I won't go too deep into Twisted Metal because we've already dived into that, but I am a big Twisted Metal fan.
We dove in deep on that a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
How about like the very first Spider-Man game?
Oh, I remember playing that Spider-Man game in your basement. I remember it was like there was a couch and you had one of those big TVs and like one of the big CRTs that was in a wooden frame that just sat on the floor. Like it was just this massive TV in this big wooden box. And we sat there and played Spider-Man for hours. Like every summer vacation was like playing games in your basement on the PlayStation.
It definitely was. I do remember that Spider-Man game being so much fun. Like you got to just run around as Spider-Man and just beat people up, and you had different abilities, and you could like web your fists, and your fists were stronger because you had like these like web gloves on them, and just beat the crap out of people. What about some of the darker games that came out on PlayStation? Sorry, I totally had a brain fart.
Talking like Silent Hill games or?
Yeah. So what about some of the darker titles that came out on the PlayStation? So you have like your Silent Hill or Resident Evil. I know, Nick, you were big into Resident Evil.
Oh, the survival horror genre of PlayStation games is incredible. I mean, besides all of the amazing Resident Evil games, I mean, you're also talking Galarians, which was a great game. Fear Effect, great game, cell shaded. Then there was Parasite Eve, a Square Enix game that was like a blend of RPG and Resident Evil survival horror. It was a wonderful platform for survival horror games. Silent Hill, as you guys said.
Definitely remember Silent Hill being super scary.
Brendan, I watched somebody play Silent Hill one time and I was like, nope, I'm done with this.
Said you didn't play a lot of PlayStation games. What games did you play on PlayStation?
Well, I played Twisted Metal just because it was fun to drive around and beat the crap out of things with other cars. Some Crash Bandicoot, Tony Hawk, and yeah, some Final Fantasy VII. The one Final Fantasy game that I've played.
all great titles. Oh, I forgot Dino Crisis, Resident Evil with zombie or with dinosaurs. It was 100% Resident Evil, but with dinosaurs, and it was awesome.
Still remember one of my favorite songs. You mentioned Tony Hawk from Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. After you like unlock and you unlock so many and do so many challenges, you unlock like Skate Heaven, where they play Heaven as a half pipe.
Mm-hmm.
Such a classic for the Tony Hawk games.
Yeah, and that game was amazing because it was almost like a guide because we actually skateboarded when we were kids, and that game we would play Tony Hawk to figure out what tricks there even were. We didn't know, you know, we had no idea what we were doing, so we would play Tony Hawk and oh, there's a kickflip. I'll try that in real life, and so on and so on. Like that game is responsible for shaping a lot of my music tastes and teaching me how to skateboard in the beginning.
And probably teaching all those people that don't know how to skateboard how to talk shit to skateboarders, because then they're always like, do a kickflip. Because that was the only thing that they knew. You're like, oh, I could do a 360 flip. They're like, that's lame. Can you do a kickflip?
I saw this video of Tony Hawk riding around California. It was uploaded a few years ago, I think, but he would drive around and he would just pull up next to skate parks and he would just yell, do a kickflip at people. And if they did it, he would get out and give them prizes.
That's awesome.
Have you ever seen those stories of Tony Hawk, of like the stuff that happens in his real life that people don't realize that he is Tony Hawk? Like he got stopped by TSA and they're like, oh, Anthony Hawk. I wonder, it makes me think of Tony Hawk. I wonder what he's up to these days. And he's like this, literally this.
the guy that he tried to rent a car from, and he's like, oh, I thought it was a joke. I canceled it. Huh, you really are Tony Hawk.
Yes.
Yeah. Tony Hawk is a really cool dude. And the games were a lot of fun.
I will say I'm looking at the list trying to refresh my memory of what I've played, and I have played Tomb Raider as well. The old boxy, pointy boob.
Yeah, how it oddly still resembled Angelina Jolie in a boxy way.
Yes.
Like when the movie came out, it was like, oh, it had to be her because she looks exactly like this boxy character from the PlayStation.
Yeah, I think Tomb Raider was actually the first movie I ever saw without parental supervision. Like we were dropped off at the theater by my grandpa, and we saw Tomb Raider. It was just me and maybe Brandon.
Probably. I remember playing a lot of the Tomb Raider game. I remember hating it so much though for the tank style controls, because there were so many puzzles and like jumping puzzles and jumping from like on ledges and stuff, but you were very much like up, down, left, right. So like having to shift this character in almost like a robot style of movement. And then, you'd end up like halfway through this puzzle and falling and having to start over. It was one of the most frustrating games that I remember playing.
Mm-hmm. It was surprisingly scary. Like I thought it was like a survival horror game like Resident Evil. Like I don't want to fight bears and tigers. Like that's terrifying. I was scared to play it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, there was definitely more to that game than you would have thought. I know another game that I played a lot of was Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver.
Yes, I remember you and your uncle played that a lot.
Yeah, my uncle absolutely loved this game. I remember actually watching him play it more than I played it, but I do remember playing it some, and it was like such a blast because you were playing as this vampire wraith called Razel. I don't know. I'm terrible at names. We'll just go with Razel.
Asriel?
No, there's no A in front of it. It's like Raziel.
Razzle Dazzle.
And he used to be kind of friends with Kain, the vampire lord, but then, like stuff happens, and then all of a sudden now he's made out to collect souls. And it's kind of a crazy game because like when you die, you don't it's not like a game over. You get sent to this underworld sort of thing where you have to collect enough souls to be able to like make it back to your body. Right. So it actually kind of reminds me of like when you die in WoW and you're in this like shadow form to like run back to your dead body to be revived. Like I wonder if they got some of that from Legacy of Kain, because that's kind of what it reminds me of when I think of Legacy of Kain.
Wow. Apparently I've played more games for PlayStation than I thought, because I'm just sitting here looking and there's this. I played weird games like Army Men Air Tactics.
Oh, dude, the Army Men games were awesome.
I loved it. Like I'm looking at the pictures now and it's like, I remember playing this, like flying around, rescuing your guys, shooting down different stuff. Like, yeah, I definitely played this. So maybe I did play a little more PlayStation 1 than I remember.
Oh yeah. I mean, memories come back to me all the time. Like I remember very specifically playing Roller Coaster Tycoon on the PlayStation 1, but upon searching, I don't find Roller Coaster Tycoon ever being released on the PlayStation 1. So I went to a town nearby recently and picked up some retro video games. And one of the games I picked up for the PlayStation 1 was the game I was thinking of. It's not Roller Coaster Tycoon, it's called Theme Park. And it's basically Roller Coaster Tycoon. You run a roller coaster park, you know, and it was on PlayStation 1. It was a lot of fun. That was some of my early exposure to sim type games. I mean, sim games in general were pretty big on PlayStation. I mean, I believe we had Sim Hospital, if you remember that one. I think Sim Park may have come out on PlayStation. There was a lot of sim games
I
on
think it did, yeah.
PlayStation.
Yeah, I remember when you were talking about the getting that game the other day, I looked it up and I think Sim Theme Park was. I do remember seeing those type of games. I never played them, but I had friends that played them and I watched them play. I maybe played a little bit, but I definitely remember those games.
Yeah, 'cause I think SimCity 2000 was on PlayStation.
So I think SimCity 2000 was on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it is one that was ported over to PlayStation as well, because there definitely was a lot of like simulator style games on PlayStation.
Like I remember the first time we ever got a PlayStation, and the first game we ever played was the situation was essentially my dad asked us, okay, do you want to go rent a PlayStation from Family Video, or do you want to go see the new Mortal Kombat movie in theaters? And we said PlayStation, so we went to the Family Video and rented the PlayStation back when you rented consoles because you couldn't afford them. We rented the PlayStation 1, we rented some games, came home and threw in Kiliak the DNA Imperative. Do you guys remember Kiliak the DNA Imperative?
I've never even heard of
Oh.
that.
It's an old shooter. It's kind of like in the vein of like old Doom, stuff like that, but it's like kind of futuristic, kind of goofy stuff. But I mean, it was basically just like a maze shooter. You would go through these thin corridors and go through and shoot your way through things. It's been a long time since I played it, but I remember specifically that was the very first game we ever played on the PlayStation.
I don't know that I could recall the first game that I played on PlayStation, because I didn't own a PlayStation like right away. I played a lot on my uncle's system. I know the first game I played on PS2 was Gran Turismo, but on the original PlayStation, I'm not sure what it would be. I would think it was probably one of the Final Fantasy games, but I'm not positive.
My first one was Twisted Metal too. I went over to a buddy's house and he had it, and that's the first thing I played on a PlayStation.
Mine was probably something like that too, because that would make more sense. Because if you're going with the friends and have a PlayStation, you're going to play like a Twisted Metal or a Tony Hawk or
like a multiplayer style game.
Yeah, some sort of multiplayer style game that's like, hey, come over and I've got 2 controllers. We should totally play this game.
I have 2 controllers. This one's joystick sticks and is disgusting, and triangle button doesn't work. So here, you take this one.
Yeah, or on some of the games, they were made before analog was a thing, so the joysticks don't do anything.
Yeah, because the original PlayStation controllers didn't even have the joysticks.
Yeah, it was just the D-pad and a couple of buttons.
Yeah. Did they come out with the joysticks with the PS1, or did those come out with the PS2? Was that like a later edition when they made the PS1 like slim?
No, it wasn't when it went slim. It was sometime after the release of Resident Evil 2, because I know that there's the original release of RE2, I don't think had DualShock analog, and then there was another release that did have DualShock analog. Like it was somewhere in the middle of its lifespan they added the analog dual joysticks.
Yeah, I was just checking mine here, and mine does have the analogs. I don't know that I have one without the analogs for my original PlayStation. I think both the controllers I have the analog sticks on them.
April 25th, 97 is when the first analog controller with the PlayStation joystick was released. It was the 5th generation.
So it was a little while before they implemented that.
Do you guys know that the only reason they even started developing the PlayStation was because of a failed venture with Nintendo to do like a CD-ROM style?
But they got mad. Nintendo didn't want to work with them, so they said, okay, well, we'll do our own thing.
Yeah, in the early 90s. They were trying to make a CD-ROM per.
Well, I would say that venture worked out.
Yeah, definitely.
Should have tried to work with Sega. Sega wanted to work with the Xbox. They should have reached out to PlayStation.
Have you guys actually seen the prototype, the PlayStation prototype with the SNES?
I did not. They actually made a
Like
prototype for it?
Yeah, if you Google Sony PlayStation prototype, this thing, it just looks wrong because it's a Nintendo controller with the word PlayStation on it that hooks into a console, and
The console plug-in is like a Nintendo outlet.
Yes, it has a disk drive on the front of it, but it still has the cartridge insert on top. I mean, it looks like you took two systems and smashed them together into one. It's basically what it looks like they did.
Huh.
But sometimes I wish they would have.
Yeah, that actually sold for over $300,000. That prototype.
I bet it did.
It's one of the most expensive selling consoles.
So is there the only
I
one
bet.
prototype?
The Nintendo PlayStation prototype console sold for $360,000, making it one of the most expensive video game auctions of all time. I think there was only the one.
And it looked like it was in the house of a smoker, as yellow as that controller is.
I'm sure there's more, but yeah, that thing is.
That one looks way rough.
That's how they wanted it. They wanted it to have that
But
look.
the one,
so it would
the one next to it,
it would fit in the.
It's funny you had mentioned that. Like I was watching some old episodes of the Screensavers, which is this old computer show that used to be on Tech TV, and there would be like live call-ins, and people would be like, "Hey, my computer's like overheating and messing up," and they'd be like, "Well, are you a smoker?" And look, yeah, and he's like, "Well, you probably need to take it apart and clean it." I mean, don't do that next to your computer. He's like, "Yeah, you're probably right."
full of the nicotine and everything, just slowing down all the parts. But yeah, that's insane. I had no idea that they had even thought about making a mashup like that. But I guess it makes sense after us talking about the Dreamcast and how the Dreamcast reached out to Xbox to try and do the same thing. That's probably not uncommon that at some point in time during the lifespan of these systems, they reached out to other companies like, "Hey, would you be interested in XYZ?"
Yeah.
I mean,
well, the funny thing about Final Fantasy is 7 was originally being developed on the Super Nintendo or something like that, or the 64, I think. But they opted to go with PlayStation because it was more powerful. And I believe that pissed off Nintendo, and they had a rough relationship for a while. I think that might be why Super Mario RPG changed into Paper Mario.
Super Mario RPG, such a classic, such a great classic.
Yeah, so in preparation for this, I actually played a couple of original PlayStation games on my PS2 Slim that I have. I actually tried that theme park game, but it wouldn't load, unfortunately. So we'll have to have words with the store owner about that. I played Resident Evil Director's Cut. This is kind of funny. I thought, okay, I've played a lot of Resident Evil. I beat Resident Evil 4 VR twice. I think I should be able to handle the first zombie with a knife. So I turned on Director's Cut, put it on normal stuff, ran in, immediately got killed by the first zombie. And I was like, well, this sucks. So I noticed on Director's Cut, there's a training mode. So I chose training mode this time, and I was able to kill the zombie with my knife because I think I'm just way more powerful, or they have less health. I don't know. But now I'm in my 30s and I have to play Resident Evil on training mode because I'm terrible. That's pretty great. But it was a lot of fun still. I mean, half the game was me trying to remember how to run. But once I remembered how to move and groove, I was kind of in the flow. Another one I played was Vigilante 8. I think we've mentioned that before, but I don't have a copy of any of the Twisted Metal games. So Vigilante 8 was the closest I could get because it's basically Twisted Metal. And number one, I forgot how much fun it was having a game where you just drive around and shoot at people in your car. Like it's just all car combat. I forgot how much fun that was, but I also forgot how hard it was to keep somebody in front of your car while you're trying to shoot them with a machine gun. And you have to like do this big U-turn and spin and try to like tail around and get them in front of you so you can keep shooting them. Like, I don't know how we did it. And this was all with the D-pad because the analog wouldn't work. So this is all D-pad, and my thumb was just exhausted by the end of it. Like, I don't know what I did to get through that when I was a kid, but just D-pad only games, they take it out of you.
Yeah, no, it was different back then.
So I want to say that the first Crash Bandicoot was D-pad only. Crash Bandicoot was definitely a game outside of the RPGs. Crash Bandicoot was like my game when it came to PlayStation. I absolutely loved playing Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, I was gonna say you would be our Crash expert.
I played so much of that I remember when it came out, re-released on the newest PlayStation, like the remastered version, and I bought it. And I was so excited and played through like the first 2 levels, and I'm like, this is terrible. I don't know how I did this, and was good at it. I was struggling so much with the fact that some of the levels are like side scrolling this way, and then you're running like away from the camera, and then you're running towards the camera, and you couldn't actually pan the camera. You were just running in the direction of the level. Like it was very difficult to replay. But I remember when I first played it, getting everything, like doing the time runs on the levels, because like every time you could like beat a level and you'd get the crystal, but then you had the option of enabling a time run. So then you'd run through that same level again, and you had to beat it in a certain amount of time. And depending on if you beat that time, you get like an additional crystal. And then certain levels had like extra crystals that you could find, like hidden ones within the level. I remember finding all of them. I think Crash Bandicoot's one of the few games that I tried to complete to 100% when I played it as a kid. It was just so fun. It was also just one of those games that you could pick up and play, finish a few levels in a shorter period of time. Like you didn't have to be committed like with an RPG. Because if I think about the old RPGs, it's not like, Final Fantasy obviously always comes to mind, but even now I prefer the older Final Fantasies over the newer ones, because I feel like once we got into the graphical age of things just looking really cool, the overall like gameplay and length of gameplay started to go down on those games versus like original Final Fantasy games where you could play 20-30 hours and you may still not even have done all of the side quests yet.
It's, kind of one of those things where it seems like they're putting more money into the graphics of a game rather than spending the money that they used to on a story, because the graphics were all just generic graphics.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at this point in its life, I mean, Final Fantasy as a brand is very strong. So, I mean, no matter what they do, many people will buy their game,
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they want it to look really good, maybe draw on people. Because I mean, I feel like the newer age of Final Fantasies are trying to draw on people that aren't a fan of the classic RPG style, because they're way more combat oriented. I mean, Final Fantasy VII Remake was vastly different in combat styles than the original, but I still was able to find the fun in it, enjoy. But I was kind of hoping for the classic turn-based style combat. But I can see how it could be boring nowadays to people that don't have the nostalgia for it, I guess.
Yeah, that slower pace, like it's my turn to pick my actions and then the enemy picks their actions, versus where everything else is like engaging and you're moving around and you can dodge. And yeah, I could see that too. But you're right, I do miss that as well when I played the remake. I do like that they still kept the majority of like the story stuff the same and everything else, like the feel of it all was the same, just the battle mechanics were different.
Yeah, that, and they gave everybody that you ever spoke to a backstory.
So you're right, there are benefits to the idea that like, oh, we can increase graphics and do all of these things, but there's also like I do miss that. I mean, we're also to this point that the remake is going to have how many releases? Do we even know? Because the story's not even close to complete. I mean, the first one didn't take you barely anywhere. I mean, it wouldn't even have taken you out of the first disc of the original Final Fantasy.
Yeah, you didn't even get to Calm, and then the 20-minute flashback cutscene where you're like, "Oh, Sephiroth, you're so cool. Can I be your friend?" Oh, dragon. Oh no, a dragon.
And that was such a different idea too with the PlayStation games, is those big RPGs like that. They didn't let disk space limit them. They're like, oh, we're out of space and we can't do this. Like, oh, I guess we're just gonna cut the game down. They're like, no, we're gonna write in some code that says please insert disk 2, and we're gonna keep going.
Here's this new game. Here's a box of 5 discs. Have fun.
But didn't it feel so good to hit that screen? Like, oh yes, I will. And you always had to be really careful to make sure you didn't hit the power off button when you went to open the lid.
Yeah,
because it could happen. It's happened.
Yeah, and there's no auto save. So it's like if you saved an hour before that and you had no idea it was coming up to the insert disc 2 and you miss hit, you're like, oh my God, I have to redo an hour of all of that to get back to this point. And I remember like the first thing you did is like, all right, I gotta save. Make sure I gotta save on disc 2.
Yeah, that's one change that I really like about new games is that they save often. So you don't have to hope to God that there's a save point in the next room because your parents are yelling at you. You have to
Yeah.
get off, or in this case, your wife is yelling at you and you have to get off.
So it still feels like your parents are yelling at
This
Yeah. And that's why the Switch is the console to rule all consoles, because I can just take it with me in there or put it to sleep, set
Mhm.
it down, come right back to it.
I do like that about the Switch. You don't even have to be in like a save or anything. You're just like boop. And when you like boop it again, it's like, oh look, this is right where I was at. No harm
Yeah.
done. Trying to think of some of the other games that I absolutely loved on PlayStation from the RPG perspective. Legend of Dragoon was one that I really enjoyed, and I think that was just because of the battle mechanics were different than the rest. I don't know if you remember how much you remember that game, Nick, but you had like this, it was like a materia, but it wasn't called materia, but it was the stuff that allowed you to get the like your dragoon abilities, and then you could learn different attacks, but you had to actually hit them on screen to like actually combo them. So like as you leveled up and learned more, you'd have to, when you would make your attack to actually do the full attack, you'd have to time it and hit X square, X square, triangle, like in a specific order in order for it to successfully make the attack.
I did not play Legend of Dragoon very much, so I don't have much of reference on that, but it sounds cool.
Oh, really? To let you borrow it. That's one that I have on hard copy. one of the few systems I actually have hard copied games of is my PlayStation. Everything else is gone or now digital.
I'd be remiss if we talked about the PlayStation and I didn't bring up my favorite pink-haired buddy, Tomba.
I actually remember playing the Toomba demo, feeling like I didn't understand the game at all because there's like no direction when you start playing this game. You're just like running through attacking pigs, or pigs are attacking you, and like I did not understand the concept of this game, and I was like, this game is absolutely stupid. And then and then I remember going to Nick's house and he had rented it. And he was like, dude, this game's amazing. He's like, he started playing it and he was killing it. And I was like, oh, okay. The game makes a lot more sense, but I still don't know that I really like this game. So I just remember watching Nick play through this entire game.
Well, I loved it. It was such a good platformer.
Nick, oh man, I have to talk about this game that I love. Steven, it was stupid.
It really was amazing, though. I mean, it was a weird game. Like you were this shirtless, pink-haired kind of like
Jungle Man.
out in the boonies, jungle man, yeah. And you were basically fighting evil pigs, and there was like plants that you could jump on, and when you jumped on them, they would fart. You had like a whacker. It was like a flail on a chain you could use. They called it a blackjack, and you could whack pigs with it. And you could jump on top of them and then like throw them, and that would like defeat the pigs. But the whole thing was really cool because it progressed throughout. There's a relatively large kind of area, and you would meet the 100-year-old man, and then the 1,000-year-old man, the 10,000-year-old man, the 100,000-year-old man, the 1,000,000-year-old man. Like there was all these progressions that led you into new areas that introduced you to new characters and new abilities. And it was tough. It was a tough game. Some of the boss fights were pretty rad. I remember the lava pig specifically because you have to jump across these platforms and you have to jump on his head and you have to throw him into this like coin purse that's floating and like moving up and down. It's kind of like a Donkey Kong when you have the two barrels moving in different directions. You have to blast it in the right spot. It's kind of like that. So you're just like hoping that you get it because it's such a pain in the neck to jump on this guy's head. But like the game is super awesome. There's a second one that moved it into more of a 3D. It was one of those 3D 2D style games where everything was 3D, but you played on a 2D plane. And it was also equally really good. It was really weird, and the music was really weird, but I loved it as well. The retro game store I went to actually had a copy of it for sale for the PlayStation 1, $145.
Jesus.
I wanted to buy it because I had it. My parents bought it off of eBay for my birthday a long time ago, and I don't know what happened to it.
Isn't it crazy how expensive old games have gotten? Like the
Mhm.
ones we all had when we were kids, we bought, for $20, $30, whatever. And now they're hundreds of dollars because you can't find them anywhere or people are hoarding them.
There's just certain
It's
titles
ridiculous.
that have this nostalgia and persona to them that they carry so much more of a value, and it's insane for no logical reason other than the fact that it's just a title that people fell in love with. Because
Yeah.
one that comes to mind for me was Suikoden. I'm not sure if you guys ever played that. That was an RPG style game, similar fighting style to Final Fantasy 7, except you had a party of 6 people instead of 3. But the one thing about that game was the story was so vast that you're going through and playing as these different characters, that every town that you came to, there was typically somebody in the town that you could get to join your party. So like as you would talk to people, you could convince them to join your party. And ultimately, I don't remember the exact number, but you could get over, I think it was 100, I think it's 108. You could get 108 party members to choose from throughout the course of this game.
Yeah, that's intense.
One of them being a flying squirrel that you could you had to randomly encounter out in your journey, and you recruited a flying squirrel that would fight alongside you.
That's awesome. That reminds me of Chrono Cross, because Chrono Cross I think has like 36 characters that you can unlock for the good side, and then the evil side when you switch bodies with whatever that cat's name is. I can't remember.
Yes. I know what you're talking about too, but I can't remember the name either. But I do remember playing a lot of Chrono Cross too for that reason. It had just a vast story and so much to it.
Yeah, Chrono Cross was incredible. I remember it was one of the hardest RPGs I've ever played, hands down. Maybe because I was bad at it, but I know there was one particular fight against this pilgrim farm man that was so hard, so tough. And if anybody listening remembers, it's during that time where you're in like that crater area, and the dude's like, I don't want to fight you, but kind of gotta. Programmers told me I have to. This sucks. And he's just a house. He's just a house. He just wrecks your face, man. But Chrono Cross is actually coming out with a remaster on April 7th, 2022. I think it's coming out for most systems. No physical release. I checked already. Only digital. But it's coming with a bunch of cool features, things that make the battles easier. If you just want to play through and experience the story, you can basically just flip some stuff on and play through it like that. And many other enhancements. You can switch between the new graphics and the old graphics, stuff like that. I mean, it's you should pick it up if you're a fan of RPGs, even if you don't want to do the fights. Then I would still suggest pick it up, because you can just steamroll through the fights and enjoy the story. I think there's like 6 or 8 different endings you can get.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. That was the one that had there was something unique to that game as far as like it was like the leveling system or like the magic system.
Well, I know that one had the elemental field stuff. So you would use elemental magic in a row, and you would build this gauge, and then you could summon like a special thing if the elemental meter was full of a certain element.
That's right. Yeah. I think that was another thing that I loved about games on the PlayStation was nobody followed this set format of like, hey, this is how an RPG should be built, and this is how what you should expect to play it. Like it wasn't, oh, this is the Final Fantasy system was built this way, and this is how it should be. They have this materia, they have this. Everybody had kind of their own way of doing it and their own way of like of taking a spin on that and creating still a battle system. If it was like my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, but then the elements within that were always different. I was pulling up some gameplay of Legend of Dragoon, and so what I liked about that was, so Final Fantasy had like your limit breaks, which is what you would use, when your gauge got so high. Whereas Legend of Dragoon, basically you would learn different attacks and they would get stronger as you get stronger. But when you would start, you would have like your main character would have like a double slash. And what it would be is when you would run up to attack, the X button would pop up with this like narrowing box that you had to time it just right and hit your X button again as it closed over like a certain area to hit it perfect to do the double slash. And then as you got more advanced skills, you had to hit more buttons. So like I remember being at the end of the game, and it was a 4-disc game. I mean, it was a pretty lengthy game too. But I remember when you got to the end, your final attack was like having to hit X square, like, and it was at different speeds and different intervals. It wasn't just like, oh, I gotta, time it. It would be like hit, and then like a long pause because it was animation that went along with it. So you were like timing it with your character's movements.
Now there were a crap ton of RPGs on the PS1, but it was also a great racing console too. Did you guys ever play Wipeout 2097?
I don't know that I played the Wipeout game. I played the Gran Turismo games. I got big into Gran Turismo on the PlayStation.
Yeah. Wipeout 2097 was basically like F-Zero on the PlayStation. It was like super futuristic, high speed racing with like crazy, like pump you up arcade music. I remember playing it just out of memory of the name. Couldn't tell you much about it other than I had a lot of fun playing it. But I remember Gran Turismo was a lot of fun. There was a lot of rally games where you could do like the dirt. I'm not a big racer person. The dirt. What's that? Tokyo Drift. You could do the Tokyo Drift and the dirt because that's what rally racing is.
Yes.
I sound stupid. I sound ridiculous.
I think I actually played this Wipeout because I'm looking at the pictures and they've got the little like boxes that spin around on the track, the boosts and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember either I've played it or I've seen somebody play it because looking at these screens, it definitely looks familiar.
Let's not forget about what we've talked about early on, the top-down Grand Theft Auto.
Oh man.
Yeah.
A wonderful, good game.
Such an interesting concept as a way to develop that game, and the idea that it's developed into the franchise that it has. When you look at the original,
crazy.
You look at the original, and you're like, this game is rough. Like, I don't know where they're going to go from here.
Yeah, it's crazy how far it's come. And it still holds like the core like root concept of you do things, the cops get mad at you and you run away. And in between that, you steal cars and fight people. I mean, that's still the game today. They've just been able to add like way more cinematic cutscenes and ventures to the whole thing.
And a camera that's not directly facing top down. I think that was
right.
The biggest.
The camera view isn't from the helicopter filming the car crash.
Exactly.
It did feel like that. Just he's heading down 5th Street.
Especially because as you started going faster, the camera like zoomed out and zoomed in, so it really did feel like you're pulling away from the helicopter.
Yes. Yeah. Now I remember playing a lot of Medal of Honor with you, Stephen, because I would always play as the guy in his boxers, and we always called him Joe Boxer. And I would just run around as this naked underwear man, and we would just play multiplayer, like just the two of us, and have a great time. Like, can you imagine playing Call of Duty with just one other person all the time now? Like, how awful does that sound?
But it's so crazy because we did that with like even the N64. You played 2 people on GoldenEye.
Yeah.
And it's even crazier because you're playing split screen.
Mm-hmm.
So you were playing with one other person, but you could still see where they were. Stop screen peeking.
Yeah.
Yeah, get the cardboard cut out that tape
That's
on
right.
the screen.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever use any of the attachments for the PlayStation? Like they've got the multi-tap for more than 2 controllers.
Definitely use the multi-tap. Well, you know one of the weirdest attachments for the PlayStation that I used. I don't know what it was called. So we might have to look this up, but it was a thing that you could plug into your computer that you could plug a memory card into and download other people's save games onto your memory card.
I do remember that.
Yeah, it was like cheating, like super hard. It was like hacking before, I mean, we had Game Shark, but this you could just download the save file of somebody that had gold chocobos and defeated all the weapons, and just have that save file and tell your friends it's cool because they don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. They don't know that you just got on the internet and stole this game file.
Yeah.
Look, I did.
They're like, oh, why did you rename Cloud to this? And you're like, have to make up why. That's got some weird name that's not Cloud anymore.
Yeah. I love Captain Crunch.
I know we had the DDR pads. Was that on PlayStation or did we have those later?
I think that was PS2.
I think that's two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say PlayStation 1, they've got that multi-tap, they've got the mouse. Like you can actually have a mouse instead of a controller. And then honestly, I'm surprised you guys didn't have it with how much you guys enjoy like the Resident Evil games. They actually had a gun, like an actual like
That was for Time
Gun
that was for
con.
Time Crisis.
yeah.
I do think we either had it or we rented it. When you rented a Time Crisis, it came with it, but you couldn't use it on
Mhm.
Resident
Yeah.
Evil. But
The Namco gun.
yeah, because I do remember using it for Time Crisis. Because like I said, I was always
Mhm.
big into arcade ports, and when Time Crisis ended up on PlayStation, it was so much fun to be able to play that game on PlayStation and make it further than a few levels in when you're out of quarters.
Right. Because when you're that young at the arcade, you really do only have a certain amount of lives.
Yeah.
There is no, well, I'll just go get another dollar. Speaking of rhythm games, we can't ignore the best rhythm game on the PS1, Parappa the Rappa.
Another one that I didn't really play, but I remember watching you play a lot.
I don't know why I fell in love with this ridiculous game. It was basically just like terrible raps, and you would hit the face buttons corresponding to whatever was on the screen. It was just a rhythm game, but you were taught by this like kung fu guy with an onion for a head, and you were like a puppy with a beanie. It was a ridiculous game, but it was super fun.
Driver was another one that I remember playing a lot of.
Oh, I love Driver. You are the wheel man. That is an amazing game because it's like Grand Theft Auto because the cops get mad and chase you, but you can't get out of your car. So it's all car.
Yeah. And you actually drive with the camera behind you instead of above your head.
Right. I could throw that game in right now. I have a physical copy of it, and I still could tell you or take you straight to some of the glitches. Because I remember specifically in Miami, there's a building you can drive into that there's a section of it that doesn't have the boundary set, so you can just drive through it. So you can get like all the cops in the city super pissed off, and then just drive into this glitched building, and you're just in this like weird space in this building, and everything's glitched out, and you just see all the cops smashing into the building trying to get to you, but they can't because you're inside of a place that you're not supposed to be.
So we always bring up Final Fantasy, and unfortunately, I'm going to bring it up again, mainly because I loved 7 and 8, and I did like everything in 7 and 8 as far as all the extra content and side quests, whereas Nick, not so much. But Nick did have a Final Fantasy in which he did everything. It was his. I mastered all of it. He beat a planet. I mean, I beat a giant weapon. He beat a planet. I don't know how planets fight, but so Final Fantasy
With dark
Final
magic.
Fantasy 9 was the Final Fantasy in which Nick just did absolutely everything, like leveled everything up and did all the side quests. And should walk us through that adventure, Nick, because I remember how excited you were when you got to fight the planet.
Oh, I loved Final Fantasy 9. I mean, like 7 and 8. 7 I loved from the get-go. 8 had to grow on me, but now I'm a big fan of it. But 9 just from the beginning was amazing. The original concept for it is basically it was the last Final Fantasy on the PlayStation. And the last two Final Fantasies had kind of been kind of future-ish, kind of more modern. So they wanted to kind of go back to the roots and really do kind of a love letter to the classic Final Fantasies of old. So they came up with this Final Fantasy 9, and that's kind of why the characters look a little chibi, and there are specific roles. Like Vivi is obviously a black mage, Steiner's a fighter, so on and so on. So they went back to the roots of like the class system. These guys are what they are, but the story itself is really cool. It's kind of dark, gets depressing, but like the side quest stuff, I had a lot of fun with. Because you go through the motions of the game, and as you do, you come across chocobos and new chocobo gardens that let you do this really fun chocobo digging game. It's called Chocobo Hot and Cold, and it really is what it sounds like. It's a hot and cold game. The chocobo will make noises more and more as you get closer to what you're trying to get to, and you dig up these stone tablets that unlock more chocobo forests that eventually lead you to the chocobo floating air garden that gives you the gold chocobo. Final Fantasy 9 had a card game system. I think it was called Tetramaster. It wasn't as cool as Triple Triad, and you didn't really get anything for doing it in the game. But the music was amazing. The characters were amazing. The big super secret final boss. I believe it was, what was it, Osmos? I think it was
Osmos or Osmosis or yeah.
Osmos, something like that. That if you played Final Fantasy 14, they actually put him in that kind of Final Fantasy 11 style thing that they made, where they added this big long dungeon where at the end you actually fight Osmo or Ozma. And the mount you get in Final Fantasy 14 is amazing. If you haven't seen the mount from that, you should look it up because it's incredible. But the fight, he was the hardest fight in the game next to Hades, which was another secret boss. But I took them both out. It was really tough. It was a really fun game. You learned pretty much all of your abilities through equipment. So, like in Final Fantasy 7, you had materia, and in Final Fantasy 8, you drew your magic and learned in that fashion. But in 9, you actually would equip up, like a piece of armor, and it would have an ability on it, and you would play the game. And as you gained experience points, you would level up that ability until the point where it was fully leveled, and then you would have that ability no matter if you were wearing the gear or not.
Yeah, it was Ozma. And I remember Ozma just being like crazy overpowerful, that basically all of his attacks was him just dropping the worlds on you.
Yeah, I basically had to set it up so that my characters absorbed dark magic, so that when he would cast meteor and stuff, it would just heal me. And then I basically, I don't even think I actually attacked him, because there was a strategy you could use with the thief. I can't remember his name. But he's, or the monk, I don't know. He's the one that uses chakras, and he has the throw ability, and I would just throw stuff at him. And and like that was my ticket, because you had to make everybody float. All your characters were floating as soon as the battle started to avoid certain things. I mean, like, it was such a great game. I loved the combat system. I loved the characters, the music. It was so quirky. The whole sequence with the leafy tree was great. The ending is kind of weird, because you think you're fighting this one dude, and then you defeat him, and then there's like this secret boss you didn't know about. He's like, this is me. I'm here now, and I'm going to kill you. And you're like, well, I guess this is the new final boss. And I I have no idea why, but you take him out as well. And there's a cool like after credit sequence that happens. So I actually think I successfully navigated that without giving away spoilers.
That is fun. I remember you fighting all of those and it being like pretty intense fights for the Final Fantasy game. It reminded me of the fights from 7, like Omega Weapon and the Ruby Weapon and the Underwater Weapon.
Yeah, it was tough. And Hades was cool because it was actually in like the last area. There was like a secret passageway you went down, and you had to answer these questions right to this like anonymous thing. And then he was like, okay. And then like a battle started, and it's just this giant demon in a chair. And you're like, oh no, what have I done? I remember the first time it happened, I just died. I didn't know what was happening.
Hades was in Final Fantasy 8 as well, right? But you found like a special item or something, and like a genie's lamp or something like that. And then when you could only fight him once. You only had one chance to beat him to get him as a summon. And
that's Diablos.
Diablos, gotcha. Yeah.
Because when you finish the intro part of the game and they send you off, the headmaster gives you the lamp, and you can fight him at any time in the game.
But you only have the one chance to fight him, I think is what it was.
Final Fantasy VIII is famous for pissing us off immensely when we were trying to get all the summons. Like, do you remember the Doom Train fiasco?
I remember fighting Doom Train. I don't remember that much about it, but I remember it being a huge pain in the ass.
Well, you remember you had to have certain items to like alchemize a thing. You had to make an item to trigger him. And we had the strategy guide, but in the bending of the binding at the very end of a line, it said remedy. And we're like, okay, you needed a remedy, but it was a remedy plus.
That's right.
And it drove us insane because we're like, we have everything. What is going on? And like, it was just this freaking binding. We had to like spread it apart, and we saw a plus, and then it worked because you had to do that to trigger the fight or something.
Yes. You had to have the Solomon's Ring, steel pipes, a remedy plus, and then tentacles from a Marlboro.
Yes. Like 8 was great. Like the summon, the way you got the summons was so unique. I think I loved what is he, Odin? And then he falls and then you get Gilgamesh.
Yes. Yep, I do remember that too. Yeah, that was I did like that too, because like in all of those to get the summons, it wasn't just like, oh hey, cool, I found this thing, I'm gonna summon this now. It was, oh no, you have to fight me before I'm gonna work for you, or so like I always thought that was fun too, because it's like, oh, you're puny, why in the world would I help you? Like you have to prove that you're worthy to them in order to be able to then summon them in the future.
Brendan, have you ever thought about going back and playing some of these classic titles?
I have. There's definitely been some times where I've thought about going back and, just buying an old school system and buying these games and going through and trying them for the first time, especially, after we go through and talk about them each time. You guys always make the game sound like so much fun.
Well, what about like the modern kind of like re-releases? Because you can play all these on Switch, which
Yeah.
I know as a dad would be a lot easier for you because you could play it, anywhere.
It definitely would be easier. I need to, honestly. I don't know. I usually don't have a lot of time anymore really to play games, and that sucks. I hate that.
Isn't that the funny life of the streamer? Like
Yeah.
you stream games, but you don't have time to play like other games.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally what it is. Like I stream, I play the games for stream, and then when I'm outside of stream, I don't even play hard games hardly because it's spending time with family and stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy how that works out. I even still think to myself, like I know I can get these on the Switch, but I haven't yet. And I keep telling myself that I'm like, I need to, because they're so much fun to play. And then I find myself doing other things or playing other things. I mean, even now, I was just talking to Nick. I was like, did you see the new Tiny Tina expansions out for Borderlands? I was like, we totally have to get that. I said, because the last Tiny Tina expansion was like a D&D campaign. Like you were dropped in and Tiny Tina is like dictating like what's going on. So I was telling him, I was like, we should get that and play it. So even now, like I'm like, these old games would be so much fun to play, but I'm like, I really kind of want to dive into this new game and spend my time there.
Yeah, I've actually got a few people that have kind of brought up like, hey, you should check out this Tiny Tina game. It looks amazing. And I'm like, man, I really want to. And then I'd have to buy it. And like, I've got other games that I just bought. And, I mean, it's literally to the point that I have so many games to play and not enough time to play them.
Yeah.
That's the sad feeling of a gamer getting older.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's a look into my anxiety-ridden brain. So most nights, if I don't have any friends online to play any like multiplayer games with, what happens is I'll come back to my desk, I'll sit down, and then I'll look at my games because I own a lot of them physically, and I'll like decide, okay, I really want to play Fire Emblem Three Houses. I keep falling asleep because there's so much talking, but it's the combat is fun. I need to play this game. But then I'm like, I just went to the retro store and bought a bunch of cool PS2 games. Then I'm like, well, should I play the old games or should I play these new games that I just bought? And then I'm like, well, shouldn't I just play whatever makes me happy? And then I end up, then an hour and a half has passed and I've done nothing. And I'm like, okay, I need to make a decision. So I will generally grab 3 games, lay them out, and decide on one of those and play it for like 10 minutes and then switch to the other one and just try to find one that holds me. Making zero progress in any game. I just wasting my time. It's a ridiculous existence.
So on that topic,
Yeah.
how did that go for you the other night when I was watching television? We were talking and you were like, wait, what game should I play? How did Oddworld go for you?
I actually played Stranger's Wrath for a while. I forgot how much fun it was, but that is a really fun game. I played it for a bit, but I was also drinking that night too. So there's a shelf life on how long I can play a game when I'm drinking.
Speaking of that, did either one of you guys play Oddworld for PlayStation?
Oh God, yes.
I remember playing so much of that game too, mainly because I felt like it was so quirky and made me laugh and just giggle because of the weird stuff. Like you're doing something and you could make Abe fart, and then as you're like leading the people out, they would laugh. You'd be like, and they'd be like,
Yeah, yeah.
You guys asking me if there's like if I would go back and play games. That's one that I would go back and try because I've never played the Oddworld games and I've always wanted to.
oh really?
I would recommend Oddworld New and Tasty.
Mhm.
That's the remake. And then there's Oddworld Soulstorm, which is the sequel to that.
Oddworld is
So,
yeah. I was gonna say it's such a good game.
Yeah, and the story behind it is actually pretty amazing too. It was created by this guy named Lord Lanning, and his original vision for it was a quintet of games, 9 games, and he is trying to reach that dream still, because what happened was I think his Oddworld Inhabitants, I think his studio got bought after the first game was so successful, so then they made Oddworld 2. Which was, I can't remember what it was called. Something about brew. Something. No, I think that was called.
So you had Oddworld Abe's Odyssey, and then the second one was Oddworld Abe's Exodus.
Abe's Exodus. That's right. That's right. Abe's Exodus. Yeah. And based on talking to that's right. Yeah, based on interviews with Lord Lanning, that's not even like the true sequel he wanted to make, because the guys that bought Oddworld Inhabitants were like, we want another game, pretty quick. So they had, I think, a year to turn around and make a new game, and that wasn't enough time for what he wanted. So Oddworld 2 came out, and it wasn't exactly the sequel he wanted. And then I don't think another Oddworld game came out again until the original Xbox released with Munch's Odyssey. And then there was Stranger's Wrath that came out after that. But there's a whole documentary on them on YouTube that goes into the history and the deep dive of them, and like Lord Lanning just like lays it all out. It's very interesting. And I definitely recommend it.
So yeah, if you look at the original came out in 97 with the sequel coming out in 98, which, as you were mentioning, it wasn't kind of what he wanted. But then Munch's Odyssey came out in 2001. So if we go from the first one to that, it's a 4-year difference. And then Stranger's World was another 4 years later. And New and Tasty was actually 9 years later. You went from 2005 to 2014 for New and Tasty. And then Soulstorm coming out in 2021 was another 7 years later. So, I mean, there's a lot that's going into the development of these games, compared to some other games where they pump them out every couple of years. Like, obviously, he's got a story in mind and wants to really put out, the best possible game.
Well, what happened was he was able to regain control of Oddworld Inhabitants, but they were out of money because the last game the games they had made weren't very big. So what they started to do was publish the first 2 Oddworld games digitally on like the other consoles like Xbox and stuff. They started to use that online market, and they worked up enough money to make Oddworld New and Tasty. So like they're like all on their own pumping this out, just trying to make enough money to make the games they want. So all the games are completely creatively controlled by them now. They take as much time as they need to make them. And it's just a great story. It's a great story about game developers getting successful, losing the success, and then regaining it on their own. It's a really great story. It's so great.
But it's also
it's the greatest.
It's also crazy to think that that's his story for his gaming thing. But then if you've ever played Abe's Oddworld, it's like almost as if it's like a real life rendition of what he was going through, right? Because you're playing as Abe.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're playing as Abe trying to rescue your own kind from this prison where they're
that Lord Lanning guy actually voices Abe too.
Oh, does he really? That's
yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that would be one, Brendan, I would definitely recommend, because it was cool because you didn't really have like weapons or anything, but if the enemies saw you, they would like shoot and kill you. And that was also what was great too, is like you would die, but there was no like death screen. You would just like immediately like reboot, and you would reload from right where you were to try it again.
Mm-hmm.
But it was cool because you had this ability to like take over the enemy. So like you would like concentrate, and then Abe would take control of like the little enemy thing, and you'd have to run as the enemy and accomplish whatever you needed to do to like maybe lower a bridge or open a pathway. and you could run as the enemy and kill the other enemies. And then once you no longer needed this guy, you could concentrate harder and his head would explode.
Yeah, it was super fun. And what that was a workaround because they never wanted to put a gun in Abe's hand, but they were like, well, we need guns somewhere. So it was like a they came to terms with it, and they were like, okay, well, we'll let him take over somebody else that has a gun. Like that was their way of working around giving Abe a gun.
And like I said, it's definitely so much fun. We're playing so much that I don't think I've ever played like any of the new ones. I think I may have played Stranger's World, but I'll have to look into New and Tasty and definitely play Soulstorm. I remember when Soulstorm came out, and I said that I wanted to get it a year ago, and I still haven't done that.
Yeah, heck, I bought it and I've only played it for about 5 minutes, but it was really cool.
So yeah, I mean, like you're saying, the life of a gamer getting older. I have all these games that I want to play. I mean, we talked about playing so much of the new Borderlands, and it's the same thing. I bought the season pass because that's the new thing. Like we talked about these microtransactions and everything. That's the new thing. I bought the season pass for Borderlands, so I have the first 2 or 3 expansions. I beat the base game, started the other expansion, haven't played it since. And I keep telling myself, like, I still have it on my computer because I'm like, I'm gonna get back to it. I'm not gonna uninstall this 150 gig game because I'm gonna get back to it. I still haven't done it. And now Tiny Tina's Wonderworld is out, and I'm like, I need to get back to it.
So I always like to ask the random questions of the facts about the systems. When do you guys think the PlayStation 1 stopped being produced? Like, how long do you think its lifespan was?
I'm gonna say 2003.
Steven?
that it was stopped being produced.
Yeah, its lifespan, when it was, because it was made in 94. When did it end?
I'm gonna say 2003 because they also created the PSX Slim thing, so they kept making PlayStations for a long time.
Yeah,
And you're talking the lifespan of the original PlayStation 1, not the.
it's just PlayStation 1. Like,
yeah, I'm taking it all.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
When
I'm gonna
stopped
say
making-
2003.
We graduated high school in 2007. And I'm trying to remember my Bleeding Wall because that was on the PS2. So it'd have to be a few years before that. I'm going to go with 2004.
Its lifespan was 12 years, and it was discontinued in 2006.
PS1 is so strong.
It was.
It's a powerhouse.
It sold 102.49 million units.
Yeah, that's crazy, Daisy. I mean, it was such an amazing system. I mean, all the games we've talked about are just a drop in the bucket to, I mean, I don't know if we've talked about kind of, I know for sure we haven't talked about this, but the general structure we're going for is we're doing kind of like overview-ish kind of views on things, and then we're eventually going to dive deeper into specific games. So there's a lot of games on the PS1 that are going to fall under the category of I want to dive deep into that game.
Yeah, or just that genre of games, because we didn't really touch on like the tactics style games, right? Final Fantasy Tactics, Vandal Hearts, those games that were turn-based games, but they were turn-based, like I don't know what they call those, like more of like a tabletop style game.
Yeah, like grid combat.
Exactly. Yeah. And there were so many games like that on the PlayStation that were actually really good, which is kind of a game system or a game style or genre that after the PlayStation, it kind of ceased to exist, right? As graphics got better, we tended to not see games like that, games that were these grid-based top-down, war style strategy games, which is unfortunate because I always thought those were so much fun too.
Yeah, so I think that's the reason. So there's a game called XCOM. So XCOM is a kind of like tactic style, like grid-based combat thing that came out a few years ago, but it's like massively popular because people love that. And then there's also one that my brother is always trying to get me to play. It's called Dead Cells. And I've looked into it and it looks amazing. It's another grid-based combat, and some people say that's like the best one. But that's another reason why I'm trying to play Fire Emblem Three Houses, because that's the style of combat it is. It's the grid-based, like tactic style combat. But there's in between combat, I have to teach classes and like walk around school campus. It takes a lot out of me. I feel like it's such a slog to get to that next mission. It's a whole month.
Hmm.
Yeah, you guys talking about the graphics and everything. It's still crazy to me whenever we talk about these older systems, the memory that they had. Because you think of games today and then you look at the memory that this thing had. It had 2 megabytes of RAM and 1 megabyte of virtual RAM. That's like a blade of grass in most games today. Like,
Yeah, that's not going to cut it.
no,
It's not gonna,
you'd get like a rock. There, look, you loaded your rock. That's all you have now. And like, like game like Elden Ring, like that's out right now or stuff like that. I mean, it's
my watch has better
Yeah.
equipment inside of it than that.
I can play, old school PlayStation games on my Samsung Fit watch.
Yeah. But a positive thing about that is that makes it very easy for emulation.
Yes.
I mean, you can grab a Raspberry Pi and throw a case on it, and you could throw on like every system up to like PS3. Don't put PS3 on there, just up to PS2, and it can run it just fine.
With hundreds of games booted on it too.
Yeah.
No problem.
And this is, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I was at Best Buy recently and I was looking at those 1UP arcade machines, and it just makes me so mad that they sell these things for close to $500 and there's only like 3 games on it. Go home, like get out of here. Like, I understand the cabinet's probably expensive to build. It looks great. The paint's great. Some of them come with stools. Hey, that's awesome. Put more than 3 games on here, man, because all you're doing is adding more work. Because now really all I'm doing is buying an arcade cabinet that's ready to go, and then I have to install MAME and like do all this other stuff to put more games on it because there's 3 games, and I can't have 50 arcade machines in my house.
Right now you feel like Vin Diesel from the first Fast and the Furious. He's like, now me and the mad scientist got to rip apart the block and replace the pistons you fried. Like, that's all you're doing. You're just ripping apart the cabinet.
Yeah, like I love them. I think they look awesome, but I just wish they put more freaking games on them. I mean, we're talking about kilobytes here.
Yeah. I might have even thought that with the small systems like the SNES and Nintendo, like they didn't put a whole lot of games on there, but I've seen that you can hack those and sideload them with so many games. And you can even download the case of the game and attach it to it so that when it shows up on screen to play it, it looks as if it was supposed to be there. I'm like, why didn't Nintendo just do that? Like, why did you not do that to begin with? Like, they're your games, you own them. Just put them all on there.
Well, hey, that's a good segue into talking about the PS1 classic they released. Did you guys play that at all? Did you buy it?
I did not.
I actually pre-ordered it, and then I read reviews and canceled my pre-order because they were all the PAL versions of the games. They were all like the European versions or something like that, and like they didn't run right. And also, there wasn't that many good games on there. There was like 3 games that I would have actually played on there. Like, come on.
Yeah.
It looks like 20 pre-installed games.
Yeah, it's so hard for that to commit to those. Like, yeah, the console's nice, but the fact that there's just not enough games on there. There's just not enough games for what you want out of it. And then there's no way to like add additional games. So that makes it frustrating too, because ultimately you're like, oh yeah, I want to get this, but there's no way for you to get the extra games that you want. It's not like they're selling it with the intent to sell add-ons that you're going to like hook this mini thing up to the internet to download more or pay for more.
I think we've entered into the realm of we're being old and complaining. I think we better wrap it up. Well, thanks for listening to our special PlayStation episode. We're going to go ahead and get a Gamers Getting Older PlayStation 1 disc sticker design so that you guys can update your retro PS1 consoles with our fresh new look. Check us out on our socials. What are those socials again?
Those are at Gamers Getting Old on Twitter and Gamers Getting Older on Instagram. Until next time.
You're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go Mac, right? Like,
Do it, baby.